So this is such a hard subject to talk about because we're trying to point to, to something which is here, which is happening, but is beyond words. Or it's not even beyond words, words arise in it. But the words that are arising in it are trying to describe that, which is kind of a really difficult thing to do. So all the words are more like a poem or a song where it's more pointing to something. It's about not the feeling but the flow of it more than what's actually being said. It's not quite the feeling of what the words are saying, but there's a sense of what the words are saying beyond what they're actually saying. See, we get entangles from the very start, yeah. It's hopeless in words. Oh, I'm going to have to take my jumper off. I'm getting hot from it. So why a lot of people come to these talks is because, or this is what the reason why they think, is because they've begun to feel uncomfortable in daily living. There's a discomfort, a dissatisfaction, and it's more of an energetical thing than anything else. It's normally somewhere in the torso, or it feels like it's in the torso or this area, and it's a sense that there's something not quite right or there's something missing. And maybe lots of avenues have been explored. So maybe therapy's been explored, having kids, buying a big house, getting a new car, education, politics even. All these different things have been explored, but there's still this sense of unease, like there's something missing. And sometimes that gets really large and life feels like it's unlivable, like it feels too big, this discomfort, and sometimes it's less. And in different body-mind mechanisms, it varies as well. Some body-mind mechanisms, that sense is really agonizing. And even, I've forgotten that word, disability, it even disables them, that sense. If, like life, a regular life of earning money and functioning like the rest of society seems impossible. And then in most body-mind mechanism, that sense gets larger and smaller, that discomfort. And it also feels a lot of the time that it's followed with certain thoughts. There's this discomfort, and then the thoughts start about what it's uncomfortable about. And it starts blaming people or judging the situation or trying to get to a better situation, and then or worry and anxiety, and sometimes the thinking gets really rapid, but it starts with that original contracted sense, and it comes and goes, this contraction, and when it's not there, things are fine, it's not even reflected upon, it's just life is being lived. But when it's there, life does begin to feel a bit heavy, and it gets greater and less and is always changing. This is just a bit of a story, but it might resonate a bit. I mean, in the end, I've got to implode this story because there's also rubbish, but we'll just go with it for a while. So then sometimes people come across an idea of enlightenment, and this idea of enlightenment can be very exciting and very frustrating. At first, normally people get the idea of magic and special powers and big explosions and bliss and a constant state of perfection, and they focus on action and they think that the body is going to be a really great person that saves the world and all these things. They basically, the enlightenment just becomes the superhero, you know, in the film. And then after a while that begins to become heavy because it's like the house or everything else that's been tried. The superhero image of enlightenment gets tiresome and annoying, and it's not it either. And then eventually there tends to be a point where everyone gets to where it's like, fuck it, I just want to be happy. God, I just don't want to suffer anymore. I just don't want to feel uncomfortable with what's happening. And then the ideas of grandeur begin to dissolve, and There's just a simplicity about it, just the end of suffering. And then this is where this normally comes in. And what I'm pointing to, and quite a lot of other speakers point to, is just the absence of suffering. But this is complicated, but very simple. It's complicated because it's not the way you think it is. The end of suffering isn't like everything else where you can go and get the end of suffering. It's the falling away of all of those ideas, and this sounds so dire in a way, falling away of all those ideas of better. Isn't that weird? That feels like the worst, most depressing thing, that you lose your ideas of future and getting there. And also with that, you kind of lose yourself as well, because the identity is mostly based in time, in better and future and avoiding the past. But it's not like getting the car, it's not like getting a degree. You don't work towards it. It's a crumbling of something, and it's quite weird how that crumbling happens, and we don't really know, anybody, why it happens. It just kind of happens. Often this message is heard, but sometimes you meet people where it's just fallen away for no reason. That it's just that they were suffering, and then that collapsed. It just stopped, and there stopped being a problem with what was happening, or life. But often I meet a lot of people that do listen to this, and they seem to report that that energy, that personal energy, which was looking for this better future, crumbles, or slowly crumbles over time. Then even that idea begins to crumble, and that gets boring, the idea that you went through a process that was deconstructing, and then even that becomes irrelevant. And what these talks often are about is questioning everything you think you know, and the base thing that you think you know is that you are alive, and you are the body, and you are moving in time. When that crumbles, those main things, then all the expectations, the future beliefs, the ideas crumble as well. And what seems to happen is this energetic contraction of discomfort goes as well. That sense of, this is my life and I've got to get somewhere, and I've got to be better than this moment, or I've got to be better than what I am, crumbles as well. But it's not something logical. It's not a process that can be taught. And it's not down to you. But that's really weird. I mean, how do we talk about that? It's not down to you. So everything you think you know is always questionable. There's nothing that we can say is truth. Truth is a made-up thing. But yet all these assumptions have been made. I know this, I know I'm alive, I know I'm this body, for sure I'm this body. I know all my feelings, I know what my feelings are saying to me. I know why I'm uncomfortable. And at the end of the day, we don't know anything. As a kid, we never suffered. As a very young child, we never suffered. Why? Because there wasn't these ideas of who we think we are. The same with the animals. They don't suffer. Maybe the animals have really shitty existence sometimes, and have really painful existence, but they don't suffer because they don't think, or they don't have this sense that I am somebody, this energy of I am somebody and this is my life and I've got to make it live up to something. It's just as it is for the animals. I can't really describe to you what just as it is means. It's just as it is. So people often say, so what is this, or what is actually happening? And we can't actually describe that. It's what's happening. But it's not what you think's happening. That's why we can't describe it. So we do these talks, or I do these talks, we can say I, Lisa the body, does these talks, but it seems like we're going somewhere. It seems like there's a deconstruction happening, or it seems like there's a questioning and there's a goal of a falling away of suffering. But if I could put that in words of how abstract that description is, it seems really real and realistic that that's what's happening here, but it's actually very abstract. It's words that are making sounds that have been taken to be real. It's actually loads of sensory perception happening that don't make sense, and they're never going to make sense. It's even beyond sensory perception. That's even limiting. It's energy expressing beyond any idea of it. This can be really scary because it can feel like madness. In a way it is. It can be really scary because it can feel like falling into a big black void of everything you think you know. What's the point? What's the meaning? That's scary. There's no point, there's no meaning, there's nowhere to get to. This hasn't got heaven that's going to happen. There's not heaven waiting for us in the future. There's not a God with a big long beard. This is absolutely meaningless, even more meaningless than the word meaningless. I'm sorry. It's just expression happening for no reason at all. And it's so creative. It's created meaning, it's created purpose, seeming purpose, it's created destination. But at the end of the day, it's for nothing. This can sound very nihilistic, but it's really weird because the joy that can come with the absence of meaning, the absence of purpose. The nature isn't suffering, the nature is quite free expressing. God, all the words I'm trying to put it in. So it seems like these talks have a purpose in the sense there's a deconstruction happening and there's a talking about suffering. But it's way beyond that, really. That's just, it's not even quite, I mean, that's just an excuse, I suppose, or something like that. You didn't get your coffee. Oh, you did?
No, I did. It's not kicking in.
You need a Red Bull.
Come beyond coffee and stuff. Don't take it personally.
I think there's still some more introduction coming before we start with the question.
That's such a strange thing to say.
I know, it really is.
That's great.
I really, when
It's
that
like
guy...
you're in the toilet. Oh, I think there's some more. Oh, I don't think I finished yet.
It does feel like that, but just the opposite end.
Yeah, exactly. I'd rather be more pretty.
That was a really good, that's what I should have said to that guy the other night. Why don't you prepare beforehand?
It's important not to push.
Oh, that's tickled me now.
Oh, very little music giggles.
Yeah, that'll put you
I mean, this is just nonsense what I'm going to say, But it sometimes does seem, just from doing these talks, it seems lots of times that a side effect of this seeming deconstruction, look how careful I'm being, is giggling or the opposite, the crying. I don't know why that is, but it's like an energy, I don't know, some chemicals exploding in the brain or bits of the brain exploding, and it results in giggles or crying. So what often happens in hearing this message is there's three ways that personal energy tends to react to this. There can be this hearing of it where you're not strongly listening to the words or the intellect. It's more like a hearing of it, like you're listening to music, or you're not hearing in a really intellectual way. The other ways that, or reactions that can happen when listening to this, is the person will listen to this and then compare themselves to what's being said, and they'll start telling the story of how unenlightened they are and how enlightened she is. Or they'll go the other way and start telling the story of how enlightened they are and how unenlightened and wrong she is. So it tends to be those three different reactions. And so the questions can be quite funny, because there'll be questions that are just popping out and they're not particularly from a really strong personal energy. There's just questions coming and answers happening. And then there can be questions from those either ones, which are very funny, where the questioner is trying to convince me that they're really unliberated, which I don't believe at all, because you're all liberated. Or they're trying to convince me, and this tends to be the more funnier one, that they're really liberated and that I'm not. This is also fun. So it can be, and none of them are wrong in any way. It's what's got to happen. I recently found a video of me speaking with Ramesh Balsekar. This is a long time ago, and it was really funny because at first I was trying to convince him how unliberated I was, and then it was really funny. It was like the body just changed and then suddenly went into the mode of trying to convince him how liberated I was in one question. That was quite amazing. I was going to put it on YouTube. I thought it was so funny. Well, I think that's it. So if anyone has any questions, there's not